Welcome back to another edition of the Hard Sell. I'm your host, Joel Stevenson, and on the Hard Sell, we recognize that selling is hard, so we're trying to bring the leading experts in selling straight to you so you can achieve better sales results. And today we've got another great guest. Jen Abel has a long and storied sales career working at companies such as General Assembly, Sherpa, The Muse, working with Techstars as an advisor to cohorts. And recently, well, I guess not so recently now, I'll have you explain a little bit more, but you started your own company to try to help other companies figure out selling, particularly enterprise selling in the US market. So Jen, welcome to the Hard Sell.
Joel, it's an absolute blast to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, great. Well, maybe just to tell us a little bit more about JJELLYFISH and maybe kind of how it came to be and what you're up to, and then we'll get into some of the questions.
Sure. So JJELLYFISH launched, I think we're celebrating our 6th or 7th year in July. So a long time ago, certainly how it feels. And we specifically help founders go through the 0 to 1 journey in the US market. So obviously, most of our customer base is made up of international founders, but we also certainly do a little bit of work with US founders as well, which is how do we identify the leading indicators and show traction towards the big milestone of product market fit. So love the early stage sales journey and all of the ambiguity that comes with it.
Yeah, it's an interesting place to be. And maybe one question to sort of start with, you talk about product market fit, and like where are people typically on that journey? Have they already sort of figured it out and they're like, okay, well, the founder has figured out how to sell something, and now this founder needs additional leverage? Or do they come to you saying, well, I think I have product market fit, but I'm really not sure? Like, maybe tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think the famous line is, if you don't know if you have it, you don't have it.
Right.
Yeah, I did not come up with that. That's obviously what's been said a lot, but mostly when founders come to us, they have a very clear vision and point of view about the problem they believe the market is facing. And then what we do is embed alongside them to help collect evidence about what part of their vision is most true. Right? When you go out to market, just because you believe the market has a problem doesn't mean they believe they have a problem, which is the unfortunate truth a lot of these founders face. But it really comes down to, if we were to come here or even just launch in the US market, what part of our vision is most true and how do we double down there? So that's where most of our time and attention goes. And then obviously with that truth, or finding that truth, how do you acquire those initial 8, 10, 20 customers around that and really create that beachhead, that traction, but most importantly, to begin to build that trusted market.
And do you find that your customers come to you after they've sort of tried it, maybe unsuccessfully, or is it they recognize up front that this is going to be hard to do without somebody that understands the US market better?
So first-time founders, it's usually they'll come to us for the Hail Mary. And then second-time founders, they will come to us, pretty quickly and say, here's everything I don't know. Help me figure out how to validate it. Right. So they know the importance of identifying the problem before over-investing in developing the product. While, unfortunately, first-time founders, they fall in love with the product, rightfully so. Right. That's where most of their experience and passion lives, but wait a little bit too long on the sales side of things, which makes it more challenging, right? Because there's also a bit of that confirmation bias and sunk cost bias that's gone into building this product, and now trying to force it into, force a square peg into a round hole kind of thing.
Yeah, and is that and how does that sort of manifest itself maybe in some of the mistakes that you see people making? Like if you've gotten to the point where now it's a Hail Mary, like what are some of the mistakes you've made along the way to get to that point?
So when people come to us a little bit later, there's a few telling signs. One of those signs is we've sold to these 5 different customers. We now need to figure out where things become more repeatable. And when you look at those 5 customers, they're all over the map. right? They have different buying cycles, different budgets. They're in different roles. There are different maturities of companies. And when you're doubling down into a target market, I can't stress enough the importance of being as specific as possible and as focused as possible. Specificity and being able to speak to something specifically actually builds trust. And then the second is, once you get to know somebody's problems really well, that starts to compound, because they all start looking alike when you go further into the market. So you start to become an expert around that problem. So when people come to us, we usually say, like, you have to pick a lane and we'll help you validate that lane. But it's so hard to understand one ICP really well, let alone 5. So in order to stack the odds in these people's favor, we usually say to them, pick one. This is a process of elimination. This is not a hedge game, right? And it's a scientific experiment. Does this market believe this problem exists? And are they actively seeking to solve it today? If the answer is no, where do we take that rejection and iterate our focus and refocus? Or the illustrative word pivot, which people use. But the key is being as focused as possible, because that allows you to understand truth a lot faster.
Yeah, we see this, I mean, certainly a little bit of our own experience with being a product-led bottoms-up company. You end up with a lot of different people showing up and buying your software. I don't know to what extent like you see that manifest itself, but it seems like, now with, the ability to get products out there in a free tier or whatever it is, like it does tend to attract a more diverse set of people that you then have to sort of figure out who you're going to try to serve.
Yeah. The other interesting thing is, a lot of people will come to us and say, oh, we're a product-led growth company. And then, the obvious question is, well, how do you know that's how they want to buy? Mm-hmm. Right? Like, product-led growth is interesting because it means there's not much inertia, right? Like, they can go on and buy it, and they know what they're buying, and they're educated, and they know a lot about what they need, versus some of these other companies that kind of come a little bit out of left field, where the market might not even be aware there's a problem. And then they want to try product-led growth just because it's the sexy hot thing to be right now. But there's so much inertia that you have to overcome. It's much easier, or it's a lot better to validate what is the right approach versus just pigeonhole yourself, because it's the new thing.
Right. Yeah, for sure. We've definitely seen a lot of that. And there's, when you think about trying to build out your product, there's a lot of footprint that's just required just to make the sort of the product-led motion work. That is, if you're not spending building features. And so there's definitely a real commitment there that I think sometimes people underestimate. Getting back to the sort of the geographic side. So and maybe on the also thinking back to ICPs, do you find that maybe for somebody that's got something maybe a little bit more established in, like, let's say, Japan or something, and they're trying to adapt to the US, is it pretty much the same people, the same processes, or is it like you end up with like very different buying centers and very different, let me talk to you a little bit about like how well things tend to translate across.
They never translate. Just because you were able to find product market fit in your local region almost never translates. In fact, it's actually a massive misstep and misconception, because a lot of founders will say, oh, wow, I'm doing really well in Europe, I can just go sell this in the US. And what they don't realize is that the US has such a different buying process. Like, for example, in some of these markets like Japan and India, where relationships are so important to, business and getting things done. In the US market, relationships are important. But what I actually think is even more important is the value someone's going to be getting and selling that value. And that, I think, is a little bit of a wake-up call when folks come into the US, and then their technical maturity is radically different. There's this misconception of like market maturity and buyer maturity. Just because the market is talking about it doesn't mean the buyer has any idea how to buy it or sell it in, or even trying to solve it today. So I always mention to founders, you think about some of this Web3 stuff, like, a lot of people are talking about it and there's a market behind it and there's a lot of money going into it, but that doesn't mean that these people are actively seeking to solve this today. And I think that is the big difference between, finding that pulse versus someone just saying, oh, this is cool versus will it actually close? And that there's a huge delta there, which is quite common.
Yeah, I imagine it is. And so if I'm thinking about, like, let's say I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to invest more in my current country, like I'm just going to expand an industry, or I'm going to,
Sure.
maybe target, some different buying center or something like that, versus doing an international expansion. Like, how should somebody think about that?
Yeah. So I'll just speak to B2B side of things because I don't really have much experience or knowledge on the B2C side. But on the B2B side, the best way to think about expansion is when you think about your overall market, where's the majority of that market, right? So a lot of international folks will be building for the US market on day one, right? The US market represents 60% of the B2B market in the world, right? If you can't crack that, there's going to be a whole other set of things that are going to happen in terms of, how you're valued and where you need to go. The second piece is, if you are, and the beauty with US expansion is it's very homogeneous in the sense that you really only need one go-to-market, right? It's not like, Europe, where each country represents a different go-to-market. So it's a little bit cleaner in terms of coming into the US. And the US is so used to buying from startups in most markets, not every market, in most markets, that it might be easier, if you've really struck truth in terms of the value that you're offering. It's actually not hard to generate that momentum that you need in the early days. So in terms of US expansion or geographic expansion, my focus or, expertise is really coming into the US. And coming into the US, if you're building for the US market on day one, come here yesterday, right? If you're, building for the US market and it's your secondary market, but you want to find local traction first to kind of build that momentum, make sure that you're not waiting too long, because your product can become a little bit localized in the sense that even how you're building it might not translate to the US. So for example, if you can't integrate with Salesforce or HubSpot and you're building a sales tool, you're going to have some big problems coming into the US market, right? So things like that are really, really critical. But I see a lot of folks building dev tools, right? And they're building for engineers.
Yep.
The beauty with that is that's kind of that translates anywhere, right? Versus some of these other tools like HR tech or legal tech or sales tech. I think that can be a little bit of a different game, but I see a lot of folks building for the US on day one, and most importantly, maybe coming here as their secondary market. So coming in at the Series A, Series B.
And what's a reasonable expectation for somebody, that's doing that has a product that's going to work well in sort of American B2B enterprise? Like, what's a reasonable expectation for how long it takes before you sort of have your answer about whether it's work or
Yeah.
not?
I usually, there's some leading indicators that you can look for. So obviously we all know enterprise deals are about 9 to 12 month sales cycles. But when you have limited brand equity and you're still trying to figure things out, assume 18 months, right? Until you probably land it and get it right. But there's some leading indicators that you can look for, right? Some of those leading indicators include, if you reach out to 100 people as the founder, how many people are willing to get on a call with you cold? Is it 10, 15, 5, 20? That can start to give you some bites in terms of, where people's interests lie. And then, when you talk to them in the discovery stage, how many of them actually actively have a budget dedicated to this right now and to solving it? Well, that will also give you an understanding of how long things will take. There's actually, we built out a bit of a matrix where it talks about the 5 buckets a lead will fall into, right? Actively seeking to solve today, which is an inbound lead in most cases. Actively seeking to solve today, but like unaware of what's the best way to solve it, right? That's usually like a 3 to 6 month sales cycle. And then below it, there's this chasm, which is like, I agree a problem exists, but I'm not motivated to solve today, or it's not priority 1, 2, or 3. Those are going to be the 18-month, 12 to 18 month sales cycles, maybe even 12 to 24 month sales cycles. But beauty with enterprise is once you got them locked in, they are very sticky. So it's a huge upfront cost, but it's got a lot of return on it.
Right. Yeah, we've sort of covered the portions of this sort of 0 to 1 problem in prior podcasts, and Matt Bloomberg from Bolster was talking about this idea of, like, as a founder, you go from whiteboard selling to PowerPoint selling, and eventually to sort of PDF selling.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, for somebody that's like trying to, if they're a founder that's working in the US, and they're going to work with somebody like you to figure that, like, how much is the founder involved in the selling versus how much can they pass along to
Yeah.
someone here in the local market that's trying to help them adapt?
Yeah. Founder in the US market needs to be intimately involved, if not leading it. Like when we do our work, we're embedded alongside the founder, but the founder is the front line when it comes to engaging the market, right? We'll help them validate and remove bias, but these are their relationships that they need to own. And at the end of the day, when you have limited brand equity here and you're really early, that founder relationship and the founder selling is actually a natural advantage most people don't even take advantage of. And in pre-product market fit, it's all got to be founder led and founder managed. So we usually say founder led selling, right? You're the first AE, prove it can be done by getting the first 5 to 10 deals over the line. Then the second stage is founder led managing, where you can now hire 2 AEs to replicate what you've done, but just be sure that you have some level of a process built. You know who you're going after, why you're going after them, most importantly, how to hold them accountable. Right? We all know there's a lot of degrees of good sales reps out there, and that accountability piece is so critical in the early days. And then once you prove you can get that first million in revenue and traction, you can now start to begin to think about a VP of sales and now scaling this with bodies. But so many founders think a VP of sales is like their first, or at least first time founders think it's their first sales hire. But like, that's maybe one of the biggest mistakes they can make.
Right. Or right. Or the person that actually can't go in and help you figure out the sales process, like the person that wants to hire immediately rev ops and, an army of people right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that movie before. It didn't end well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And they wonder, I constantly say this, the more bodies or more sales bodies you introduce into the process, it's inversely correlated to finding product market fit, right? Because the further you get away from your customers, the more consent, the more voices there are. I mean, it's got to be, the founders got to understand, what to remove as noise and where to be doubling down.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject, and we could probably spend hours and hours talking about it. But we're starting to run out of time. Maybe one last thing from you, like if there's sort of maybe one takeaway that if there's a founder from Israel or wherever listening, then and they're trying to figure out this exact strategy, like what's the most important thing for a founder to know about coming into the US market and having success in B2B selling?
Yeah, the first and foremost is you have to earn the right to sell. And what that really means is you need to know whom you're selling to, why you're selling to them, and what your unique positioning is or point of view in terms of why they should be solving it with you. And if you don't have those things figured out yet, you're still in the customer discovery phase. And I think so many founders want to rush to just going out and selling. And the problem is when you're selling, you're just pushing information. You need to be pulling insights, right? And getting that understanding and finding that pulse and that heartbeat in the market. So just slow down to go fast, earn the right to sell. And that is actually a revenue accelerant. And it will increase your odds of success dramatically.
Yeah, I think that's true of US based founders selling into the US.
This is true too. Yes, even more so true. But yeah, I mean, whether you're everyone going through 0 to 1, whether you're an international founder or a US founder, it's the same process. Just sometimes the international founders might have success elsewhere and misconstrue that success translated into the US.
Yeah, I'm sure part of your job is sort of a reality counselor in addition to helping people understand the right way to go about selling. Yeah,
I mean, we have to say things that are very hard to hear at times, right? However, it's better to know this as soon as possible than spend a year to also, get the same result. So
Yeah, you're cheers to that. Well, Jen, if people want to learn more about jellyfish, they want to be in touch, or what's the best way to do that?
I am super responsive on Twitter DM. It's best way to contact. It's just double J for Jen, EN_Abel, ABEL. And yeah, happy to connect and chat and share any tips I can to help founders avoid any missteps.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, and look forward to being in touch soon.
Joel, absolute pleasure. Thanks so much.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.